I'm Helen Armitage.
And I'm Chris Webb.
And you're listening to The Next Normal, the podcast that explores the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had and continues to have on different individuals, organisations and sectors spanning the world of business, education and careers.
On The New Normal, we heard from a range of individuals about how they were adapting to a challenging climate. And we're now taking this one step further as we look to the future and quiz another slate of fantastic guests about how they're planning for the unknown, what different sectors are doing to adapt, and whether any green shoots of optimism are starting to appear in the wake of the pandemic and subsequent lockdown.
Thank you for joining us as we explore what the next normal might look like for all of us on a local, national and global scale.
Very good morning and welcome to The Next Normal. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Helen Armitage. Helen, how are you doing today?
I'm very well today, very well. Thank you, Chris. Again, I'd probably say another 8 out of 10 today. How about yourself? How are you doing?
Fantastic. Some real consistency coming through in those scores, Helen. It's to quote the Simpsons, everything's coming up, Helen. I think I'm probably, I think about an 8 as well. It's a Friday as we record this, which is good. Despite tier 3 restrictions, I'm going out for a meal tonight with my partner for the first time in probably about 5 months. So that's quite nice. So yeah, probably an 8, I would say. And we're really pleased today to be kind of focusing on something that I think is probably impacting almost everyone at the moment in some way, which is kind of linked to sort of working remotely. But we're going to be looking specifically at e-learning and kind of teaching and learning in the online space, the digital space, which again is something that's getting a lot of traction in the press, lots of different kind of views on it, but something that we really wanted to interrogate in a little bit more detail. And on that note, we're really pleased to welcome Dr. Chris Headleand, Director of Teaching and Learning for the School of Computer Science at the University of Lincoln. So Chris, thanks for joining us today. Are you having a good day?
Yeah, so far it's been pretty good, apart from I had a minor baby-related poo issue this morning, but other than that, everything's good.
That's great. Thanks for giving us the PG version there. That's definitely good for listeners at home. So again, before we kind of get into the thrust of the topic, as always, we're going to start with our Gloombusters, our good news stories for the week. So Helen, would you like to kick us off? Any good news stories you'd like to share?
Yeah, just a personal one this week. So 2 of my friends have got engaged this week. I travelled to Canada with them last summer. Massive congratulations to Connor and Lauren.
Fantastic. Yeah, lovely good news story. Even in, times perhaps where the weddings aren't going ahead, it's always nice to kind of see engagement.
Exactly, yeah.
Chris, any good news stories you'd like to share with us this week?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So firstly, I found out my book proposal has been accepted. It had really great reviews, which did a great job inflating my ego and making me feel happy on the beginning of the week. But yeah, so Engaging Students Online, a practical guide for higher education should hopefully be coming out next year. And I'm working on writing that at the moment. And also I found out two of my best friends are having a baby, which, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, there's not been a lot to do in lockdown, so it's good to see they've entertained themselves.
That's brilliant, really good to hear, and congratulations on the book proposal. I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about, some of the kind of content within there, as part of the podcast today. So my good news story for this week, perhaps slightly less momentous. I'm a big rugby fan, and I'm very pleased that after 6 and a bit months delay, that there's going to be Super Saturday this coming weekend. All of the Six Nations final round games going to be shown back to back, BBC ITV. So I'm going to be a hermit for the whole of Saturday afternoon. So very much looking forward to that. But those are our good news stories for the week. Now we'll move on to the main topic of the podcast. So as we said, really kind of interrogating online learning, e-learning, digital learning. Calls many different names, but of course something that's taking a lot of prominence at the moment within schools, within colleges, within universities, and we're very lucky to have a guest with us today who's going to talk us through some of the developments that are going on, some of the kind of key sort of challenges and key benefits around online learning. So Helen, over to you.
Yeah, so if we just get started then, Chris, if you can just kick us off by saying, or telling us really, how COVID-19 has impacted your work and your life at the moment.
So, well, I get asked this quite a lot, and I try to say, I try to not think of it being COVID as impacting my work. I try to think of it a new set of restrictions, a new set of boundaries I've got to work within. Because for me, the kind of COVID focus is about keeping myself safe, keeping my family safe, sanitizing everything. That's a very specific concern. So when I try and look at the teaching and learning, I think, well, what if we just decided to do things differently anyway? So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot more remote working, and that's had benefits and negatives as well. But I think what we've been trying to do as much as we had is maximizing, like I say, if we treat the COVID restrictions as kind of as a new boundaries, as something that we've got to work within, it's been trying to maximize that. And actually, I think the biggest impacts that I've seen is problem solvers have really shone forwards. They've really kind of stepped up, right? You know, if there's a new challenge, we've had to very rapidly think about a solution. We're having to think on our feet. And that bit, it'd be wrong to say I'm enjoying it, because that's, you know, you shouldn't look on the silver lining of a pandemic, right? But this agility, this kind of, right, something's happened, let's do something about it. Let's, you know, work and let's constantly improve. I've been quite enjoying that. It's kind of mixed up the sector a bit. And that's been, obviously there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of worry, and, you know, there's real kind of problems going on as well. But that bit I like problem solving. I like that bit of the job.
Yeah, that's really interesting, really interesting. And I suppose following on from that, so thinking about problem solving and agility and pivoting maybe in this world that we're living in at the moment. As a teaching and learning specialist, you often share tips and advice for delivering effective e-learning on social media. So for you then, what makes a great digital session or programme of learning?
It depends on the subject, I suppose, and it depends on the learners. So I think when we were very first started into this, we started looking at things that 100% distance learning 100% distance learning programs had been doing for a while, and say, well, okay, that must be the gold standard. But I think sometimes we forgot that those students were quite different. Those were students who'd elected to do a distance learning program. They knew what that entailed. They knew what they were kind of signing up for. Our second, third year students who've come for one very specific university experience, they haven't signed up for a distance learning provision. So they have a different set of expectations. And in the same way that, I'm fortunate in computer science, right? I can do a lot of stuff remotely, as long as people, you know, we often say, as long as you've got a box and a desk, you're fine. You know, you can do computer science anywhere. But how do you do dance? How do you do chemistry? You know, there are subjects that you need to think of in very, very different ways. So for me, what makes a really good digital learning session is one that has been not where a model has been taken off a shelf and they've shoehorned the learning into that, but one where from the ground up they've thought, what is the best way to do this with my subjects and with my students? And if I was to, I don't know if that was really leading towards a tip, but if I was to give one tip, it's to engage students from the beginning. Because, you know, I like to say we're experts in teaching, but the students by this point are experts in learning. You know, they've experienced 30, 40, 50 different educators. They've seen a whole bunch of different teaching styles. They know what works for them. They know how they like to be engaged. And actually, by having that fairly open and frank conversation with the students, you can design something that's really special. And I think the ones that I've seen that have worked really, really well have engaged students from right at the beginning in the planning stages.
No, I think it's a really important point. I think particularly, you know, those key things you mentioned there around engagement, but also that idea of sort of problem solving. And I mean, I know you've kind of talked about previously, and certainly on kind of social media, about the sort of power of video games in terms of, engaging people in sort of teaching and learning. I mean, do you feel that, I guess, with the change to perhaps more online learning and perhaps, you know, growing popularity of things like esports, for example, that using those types of methods might become more popular or more common in teaching and learning? Or are there any other kind of innovations you think that perhaps are likely to stick out, in this current era?
So, okay, I'm going to go with a little bit of an anecdote for this. So one of my teachers this was when I was in secondary school, always used to moan that they took away I can't remember what they're called now. Remember the old projectors where you put the little films in the little negatives? He used to kick out every week. He'd had this major meltdown that they took away his projector and they'd given him a television and a VCR instead, right? Oh, it'll never take off. It's, this isn't teaching. This is nonsense. And I can remember when interactive whiteboards came. I mean, I was a trainee teacher when interactive whiteboards came along, and I can remember all the teachers going, this is newfangled nonsense, it'll never work, it's rubbish, right? I think, there's still people. I mean, I know back in my previous institution, I can remember somebody having a full-on meltdown because they'd got rid of the blackboard in one of the rooms, and I can remember this big argument, what am I going to do with all my chalk now? Well, get some pens instead, right? There's this things we move through technologies, and there is a comfort. I like to think that somebody at some point had a meltdown when they said, see you've got that candle. What about this light bulb? I like to think that there's always, that there's comfort, there's in familiarity in the stuff that we know. Now, games as a medium are very young. If we're talking about people being concerned about VCRs, video games are a very, very young medium. But they are designed to be inherently engaging. That's the point. We talk about, those kids are spending far too much time playing their video games. They're spending so much time playing video games because it's fun and it's engaging and it's participatory and it's interactive. And these are all the things that we want to put into education. So you can find a way to do that. Fantastic. But it means learning an entire new skill set. And it means move away from potentially a practice that we've got very comfortable with for a number of years. And education is a, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of area. I mean, the lecture as a format hasn't really changed substantially since the time of Socrates, right? Back when people were wearing togas, this is to say like, okay, let's now go to video games. That's probably quite a major jump. And in esports, yes, they're kind of making things a bit more mainstream. But again, if anything, that can have its, the more something gets pushed, the more people push back. I remember recently there was a debate whether schools could introduce esports into the curriculum. There was this massive campaign against, we shouldn't be playing video games. And what about real sport? Kids should be eating mud pies and playing football. And yeah, okay, that's fine. No one was ever suggesting we take away the mud pies and the football, but maybe we can add something new. But again, if we look at during COVID, there was this massive boom in esports. We had the Formula One going to an esports format. We had loads of things going on that. But there was almost as much pushback of, again, this isn't what we signed up for. We wanted to see real cars driving around real tracks. And so for some people, it's opened their mind to new possibilities. For other people, it's pushed them further the other direction. And to be clear, I don't advocate everybody using games. Like everything else, you should find a teaching style that works for you and a way that you can use. Some subjects really lend themselves to game-based teaching, other subjects may not. But again, one of the reasons I kind of moved in this direction, I know a bit about games, I'm a games lecturer, but I was driven by the students. I asked the students, how do you want this delivered? How do you want this working? And games kept coming forward. So yeah, I think if you've got an open mind and if you've got to find a game that works for you, and if your students are into it, and not all students are, then yeah, maybe. I think we just need to see how it works.
I think it's quite an important point about, as you were saying, sort of the individualism and not sort of saying that anything is a one-size-fits-all approach. Because I think we've spoken before about that with education sometimes being quite quick to latch on to a latest trend and perhaps kind of picking that up. Do you sort of feel from what you're saying that maybe the pace of change, even with kind of what's been happening over the past 6-7 months, potentially could be exaggerated a little bit? That actually, as you've said, there will be kind of the usual issues around pace of change that we've always had, regardless of the fact that things have kind of moved online.
There will always be rubber banding, right? Again, and I use the interactive whiteboard because it's my favorite piece of tech to pick on. There was this massive push on interactive whiteboards. Suddenly, every learning technologist and every kind of high school purchase officer went, interactive whiteboards, let's just interactive whiteboards everywhere. That'll solve all our problems. And nobody used them. And then go 2 or 3 years down the line and everyone was taking these interactive whiteboards off the walls and putting kind of classic dry whiteboards back. Sometimes when you do a massive amount of change relatively quickly, the spring back is equally quick. And we see this in business all the time. There's principles of innovation and behavior change that, say sometimes if you push so far, people jump back equally as quick. And I think even now you can probably find interactive whiteboards on eBay for a couple of quid, But now look, we're starting to see the interactive whiteboard make a bit of a comeback. You are starting to see them come back in spaces, and actually it's almost taken a generation of change for educators to start moving the technology in that way. I think the big challenge, actually, when we're talking about change and how this innovation is going to work, is how do we keep hold of the stuff that's been really good? There has been some things that have worked incredibly well. I love the live lecture. I love the pantomime of it. I love jumping up on stage and engaging with the students. I love the performance. And I'm going to get some angry comments about that. But I do think there's a certain part of a lecture that is a performance, right? And I enjoy that. And I miss that. But what I really love about the online sessions is the chat. you've got this interactive, constant stream of discussion that's lively and interactive. And a student will ask a question. Before I've even seen it, another student's come forward with the answer. And it's created such a community of support. And the students who I know, because maybe they're my personal tutee or I've engaged with them, I know they never stand up in class. I know they never put their hand up. I know they never ask that question because they're fearful of doing it in that space. But on the chat, suddenly they've opened up this whole new world of discussion. And I'm thinking, right, how am I going to hold on? When I go back to that live lecture, how do I keep that snippet? How do I keep that back channel chat function? That for me is going to be the challenge. We're going to have to figure out what these nuggets of educational excellence are, and how do we then abstract them and hold on to them and make sure that when things do revert back to when the COVID restrictions are removed. Everyone says when things go back to normal. I'm trying to avoid that because I don't think there is going back to normal. This is such a massive change. But when the restrictions are removed, how do we hold on to this good stuff?
So we've come to the top of the pods section of the podcast, where we like to ask our guests about their favourite pods, what they're listening to in their spare time. So, Chris, any particular podcasts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so there's a few I try to listen to, as regularly as I can. So I really like the GIST podcast, which I did a session for them a little while ago. It's really good. It's called Beyond the Technology. There's some really good stuff in there about kind of amalgamating tech and education. I mean, and really kind of goes into some detail. So that there was one, I think the most recent one was on assessing students online, which is absolutely fantastic. I did one on how we've done things online at Lincoln, how we built a recreation of the campus in virtual reality. It's really good. I really rate the GIST podcast, and it's a really good team that run it. So yeah, I really recommend having a listen to that one. Another one I've started listening to recently, largely just because a couple of my students were on it, is the Student Sessions. So it's run by a higher education consultancy. They get different students from different universities every episode, and they're published pretty regularly. I think there's almost like 2 a week. It's been going for, I think it's like nearly 30 episodes now. And that's really great podcast. It's fairly easy listening. But again, I mean, a big part, if you were to summarize my kind of teaching philosophy in 2 words, it's student engagement. I believe in looping students in at all levels of decision making. And I really like it as a way of capturing students' perspectives from subjects I don't teach in. And it's really nice hearing about these different student journeys. So I really like the Student Sessions. The other one I listen to quite a bit, and again, I really recommend this. I actually did one, again, it's another one that I've done a session with, is the Naked Gaming Podcast. It's absolutely fantastic. If you've got interest in video games, and again, if you want to know about games in education, I did an interview with them on that. But yeah, the Naked Gaming Podcast, it's part of the Naked Scientist series run by a team from the BBC. It's just fantastic. It's really professionally edited. And again, it's one of these really easy listening. Presenters on it are just very cool. I really enjoy that one.
Brilliant. Really nice variety there, Chris. Thanks for sharing.
And of course, the Next Normal.
No extra prizes for plugs.
Yeah, I think that's really important to say. And yeah, I do think it's normal doesn't seem to be something that we'll hang on to going forward. But I also second what you say about the chat function. Just in the sessions that I'm delivering, I find that so interesting. And like you say, it is the students that would never speak up in class that are utilising it. And it does make you think that this is one of the positive things to come out of this mess, because it provides people with that platform who maybe they wouldn't have felt more confident to speak in class, but they do on that space there, and that's really powerful. But just thinking about where we are at the moment, and we're hearing quite a lot about online fatigue because we are where we are. There's no other option to deliver in the way that we can. This is the state of play at the moment. So we are hearing a lot about online fatigue. So what do you feel can be done in relation to how online learning is delivered to mitigate against some of these issues? How can we fight back against the fatigue?
So I'm going to put it out there. I don't think this is online fatigue. I think this is interaction fatigue. There's a different kind of engagement when we're working online. And let's say I'm a computer scientist, I'm a software engineer, and I've spent a huge amount of time in front of a computer. So when I was doing my PhD, I would sit there for anywhere up to 14 hours, not particularly healthy work habits, but I could do it. And I've often said if I had a toilet and a refrigerator, I could have just cracked on in that room for a while. And I never felt fatigued. And most of my research, most of my work is on a computer. So again, just me as an academic, I spend, the whole day at a computer anyway, and I don't feel fatigue from that. However, half a day of online meetings and I'm just shattered. And I think it's two things. One, I'm acutely aware that a camera is pointing at me. So I think people are analyzing my behavior in a slightly different way, especially if it's been recorded. I'm conscious of what I say, what expressions I give. Instead of people having my whole body language, I'm conscious that they only see a little bit of me. So I'm constantly trying to smile and give across a positive impression, and that is fatiguing, kind of constantly wearing this kind of visage of participation. Let's be honest, everybody zones out in a meeting every now and again. It's harder to do that online. I've also got this weird thing going with my eyes where I've got, for anybody who doesn't know, want to listen to the podcast, this is happening on Zoom, and I've got Chris in my top left, I've got Helen below me, and my eyes are constantly having to flick up and to the left and down and left and right, and it's tiring. I'm used to be able to, when I have a meeting, I'll look around the room, but it's a lot easier to do. Well, I find this really tiring. For me, I think I've my peak kind of meeting length is probably about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. I think anything over that, I just get shattered. And the other side of this as well, I think you kind of get guilt creeping in because the barrier to disengagement is so low. Like I say, if I turned off my camera now, I could go off, I could do something. I've got wireless headphones, so I could continue in the meeting. And that I quite like. I quite like the fact that I can turn off my camera. I can go sit in my garden, read enjoy the flowers, whatever, while still participating in the meeting. But because the barrier to disengagement is quite low, so my email's just pinged, and part of my brain says, I want to go read that email. I know it's there. What if it's important? And that's tiring. It's drawing my attention away, and I'm having to kind of forcefully bring my attention back, and that's tiring. So yeah, as for combating it, I think, again, trying to keep the sessions small. Just because this meeting was 2 hours in the physical space doesn't mean it has to be. Just any meeting really needs to be 2 hours long. And also give space for relaxing, being a bit silly. Do blocks of 20 minutes and then, right, everyone go off and get a cup of tea, have a comfort break. I think that's something we often forget. Sometimes people need to go to the toilet. And I think we need to give capacity for that. I mean, one of my colleagues in the marketing department, Naomi, she always laughs at me because every meeting I have with her descends into madness. Again, you won't see this on the podcast, but my back wall is covered in guitars. When I know I've got a meeting with Naomi coming, I try and learn a 90s pop classic. So last time it was Baby One More Time. So we were in this marketing meeting, and then I was playing the guitar, and one of my other colleagues was on his harmonica, and poor old Naomi's just trying to keep some level of control, but we were all laughing, and it was good fun. No one felt fatigued in that meeting. That meeting could have gone on forever because it was just fun, and we got a lot of work done. I think you just need to give yourself a break. Don't assume but by taking a break you're going to be less productive. You won't. You'll probably be more productive.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I really like that. And I think you've mentioned this before about it's bringing those kind of fun elements into the sessions that you're doing with students. So bringing out the guitar and playing something on that in the middle of a session with students, or if there's another jingle, that you use that as well in the sessions that you do. Is that right?
Yeah. So I've got a soundboard next to me. So I do silly little things like if I say something funny, I follow up with a, there's all kinds of, if somebody says something shocking, I can go with the old. So I do silly little things like that. I mean, this is a relatively expensive piece of equipment, but there's free versions. There's free software versions that you can do to do exactly the same thing. I happen to have this because, like I say, I'm into tech and toys and recording and live streaming and stuff like that. I've always been doing a live stream for a while. But again, it's quite funny. I do a game with my students as a break where I've got a load of, and again, this is for my games classes. I have a bunch of classic video games, theme tunes and pieces of music like Sonic and Mario Kart and things like that. And I'll go, right, okay, who's the first to guess this one will get a fabulous prize? And I'll play a piece of music and, oh, it's Halo, oh, it's Sonic. And that's good fun. Again, it just gives people a chance just to reset ever so slightly.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points in there around, it's kind of come back to a lot of the stuff you said around sort of experimentation and, as you sort of said, perhaps trying new things. And that's maybe always the risk, as you said, when new stuff comes in, perhaps that slight sort of fear or apprehension of trying new things. But I suppose, as you mentioned earlier, the importance of deciding, I guess, what's going to be useful for us to keep moving forward and what's perhaps less useful. And I mean, I guess this leads us on quite nicely, I suppose, to our final question, which is built around the title of the podcast, obviously the next normal. And I mean, although you've kind of mentioned, obviously, it's quite difficult for us to really sort of predict what might happen going forward. Are there any sort of thoughts you might want to venture in terms of, what the next normal might be for e-learning, and I guess what things we might end up keeping as a result of the current practice, or what things may end up changing moving forward?
So I think the biggest challenge we're going to see when the restrictions are removed is how do we support an offset group? So where you've got party participants online and party participants in a room. I think quite a lot of people, I think some people are just so keen to get back to work. They like the routine, they like their office, they like the kind of serendipitous kind of engagement you get by bumping into people in the hall. There's other people who actually aren't really in a great rush to get back to a 9 to 5. I mean, me personally, I've been really lucky. My son was born right at the beginning of lockdown. I've got all this time to see him grow into this beautiful, wonderful little boy. And I would have missed so much. At the moment, if Laura wants to go, my wife wants to go off and make some lunch, she just brings him in and he sits on my lap and he sits through my meetings. And it's just fantastic. It's really been something I've enjoyed a lot more than I guess I expected to. And I'm not in a great rush to lose that. So I'm hoping when I go back, I'm going to be able to do this kind of mix of working from home and working from the office, because I do like working in the office as well. I work with a fantastic team and I miss seeing them every day. And I think that's going to be the big challenge. How do we kind of support that? And I think we will see technologies come up specifically in response to that. I mean, so my old colleagues at my previous institution, they've actually bought a set of robots, which are, for want of a better word, they're kind of like an iPad on a Segway, this kind of like virtual presence devices. So you can be in a room, you can be in a meeting, you can have a face in that meeting, you can look around. And I kind of wonder whether we're going to see more technologies like that coming forward. I think lecturing technology will probably need to change. I think people have got really used to the chat function in Zoom and Teams. And I wouldn't be wildly surprised if Microsoft changed incorporate some of that into PowerPoint, so you can have live comments while you're presenting. Because I'm not the only person who's noticed how good this is. I mean, we've already seen the speed that things like Zoom and Teams have changed. I mean, Teams was a relatively stripped-back piece of software when we were using it last year, and the amount of like new functions and features that have been added during this period alone. I mean, that software development team, hats off to them. They've deployed so much live code so quick, and that's kind of what I think we'll see. I expect we'll see more stuff to support mixed working environments, working from home, working from the office. I think we'll try and see some more of this kind of digital stuff embedded into live sessions. I think we've now learnt what sessions potentially work better recorded and better online. And I think we'll probably see more of those as well. I think the one thing that's going to come out of this is students are going to get a lot more choice and a lot more options for ownership over their education. I imagine we're going to see a much more flexible sector. I think some things have changed so far. I talked about that rubber banding earlier. You can pull a rubber band so far it snaps. And I think some things have snapped. I think they've changed now and they've changed for good. But we'll see, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's the typical non-committal answers we have to have for the next one. I think it's totally fair. And I think the key thing, as you've sort of said there, is that, with certain elements of all of this, there's not really any going back. And I think that's a very similar message to what we're getting across a number of the different guests we've talked about from different industries.
Okay, I'll give you a committal answer. How's that?
Go ahead.
I think from the point that restrictions are moved, I imagine the entire sector will be recording and publishing lectures. Up to this point, there's been this, some universities have gone full recorded sessions available for revision. Other universities have absolutely not gone for recorded sessions, and some have done this, opt-in, opt-outs kind of scheme. I think that is one of the rubber bands that are broken. I think a lot of our arguments previously, well, my session doesn't work recorded, or students wouldn't turn up if it was recorded. I think we've proved that was all poppycock. And I think we will now be in a position where the sector have proved we can do it. We've proved we can do it very well. And I think students will actually start looking at that as a reason to go to university. Do you record your lectures? Yes. Okay. No, then I won't be coming to you. I think that rubber band is broken. I think from now on, we will see all lectures recorded. Maybe not, but you want a committal answer. That's if I was a betting man, I'd be putting money on that.
That's great. No, we love a good prediction. So that's really interesting to hear, and some great insights all around. So, I mean, everything that we've kind of chatted about today, if you're listening to the podcast at home, we'll, as always, make sure that we've got kind of links to Chris's work on the episode notes and any of the kind of links that we've been talking about throughout the podcast. So do check those out as well. But all that remains to be said is thanks very much to Chris for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. And thanks for those listening at home. Have a great day. If you're interested in anything that's been discussed on the podcast, or would like to be involved as a guest or have a topic to share, please get in touch with Helen or I via LinkedIn. Full details can be found in the episode notes on the Simplecast site.